special to all of you because it gives you an extraordinary opportunity to give back to Selma what Selma has given to so many and to this world. And we can only do it with your help. It starts with the vote. It starts with the vote. And I'm so excited that this panel will not only talk about the past, but also give us courage and encouragement and inspiration for the future. Because we know that the Shelby versus Holder decision is 10 years old. And we know that it gutted the most important provision, I think, in the Voting Rights Act, and that was pre-clearance. It was federal oversight. It was federal oversight. And you can't have federal oversight if you don't have a formula to determine which jurisdictions are the most egregious. And so my bill, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, would fully restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by giving us a new Section 4 so that we can enforce Section 5 and make sure that we're making sure that every American has an equal right to vote. And just when we thought it was bad enough, the Shelby versus Holder decision, Alabama brought you another case. Merrill versus Milligan. It is a redistricting case that Justice Jackson was her first oral argument. She was brilliant in that argument, but I am mighty afraid that this conservative court will further gut the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So not just Section 4, but we have to now worry about Section 2. I know that you guys will get into the details of that, and I know that this panel is an esteemed panel of experts who are out there on the front lines every day. And when we got that deadly blow from the Milligan case in Alabama, that it was going up to the Supreme Court, it was on the heels of us passing out of the House of Representatives the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, only to go over to the Senate and to languish because of an archaic procedural rule called a filibuster. Enough is enough. We have got to mobilize and organize, and we cannot give up. If you close your eyes, you will remember. You can hear John Lewis say it. Never give up, never give in. The fight for voting rights, the fight for Selma is now. Is now. And we have an opportunity to leave a legacy for our children and the next generation, and we must do all that we can to push injustice out and to let the light shine in. And in order to do that, we have to mobilize and organize. We have to remember that we can't be no ways tired because the fight is still in it. And so I hope that you come to Selma not only to reflect on the past, but that you use that as an opportunity to feel renewed, to renew yourself, to recommit yourself to the struggle that is still Selma, Alabama. Thank you for being here, and remember, please, please see us, feel us. Selma is more than just a bridge. It's a community, an amazing community that deserves better, should get better, and will continue to fight to make sure that the Selma that I grew up in is preserved and advanced in the way this nation owes this city. Thank you very much.
Selma, can you please celebrate your Congresswoman one more time, please? Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sewell. My next task is to introduce our moderator for this evening's panel. But does Joy Reid really need an introduction? The readout has become such an important and vital part of our culture, and a platform to lift up the issues that affect Black and brown communities. There are few people in the world, let alone in journalism, who use their platform so profoundly, so boldly, so richly to champion the causes and current events that matter to the people and communities that we all fight for. No matter where I am in the country, you will always find me in front of a screen at 8 p.m. to watch the readout and catch up on the day's events. Selma, it is my pleasure to welcome our moderator for tonight's program. We are so delighted that she is here with us. Please welcome the legendary, the incomparable Joy Reid.
It's always an honor to be in the space with with LDF. Oh, wonderful. I want to congratulate Tona, who I met today. Congratulations. And thanks to Congresswoman. It's wonderful to be in your district. I have 2 Congresswomen in the space right now. That's an honor. Somebody said earlier, we're in high cotton today. So thank you all. I want to just start by saying that, the thing that I love about Selma and the history of this city is the story of Selma has everything. It has every piece of the drama of the American story. I mean, you think about the fact that that march, that violent march over that bridge that is named for a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, it takes place 100 years to the month. 100 years to the month after the surrender of the villain Robert E. Lee to the very much underrated Ulysses S. Grant. It's 100 years plus a month. And so you think about that people were waving Confederate flags on that bridge as those sheriffs were beating Reverend John Lewis and the other marchers. And so you think about that. And so I want to start with you, Janae, and just have you reflect on the fact that the history is so cyclical, that we are in a sort of a new Confederate moment when you have a reassertion of the history of the losing side in the Civil War. They are asserting themselves and demanding to seize control of our history, but also of the rule of law. And so I just would love for you just to reflect for a moment. You spoke a little bit about it on the dais, but on leading this organization and this battle in this era, given the history.
So thank you for that, Joy. What I'll say is what I've been saying a lot lately, and that is that what's clear is that the fight for racial justice is not one that has a conclusion in this country. It is too deeply rooted in our DNA and in how we came to be for us to ever think that we can turn our backs on that fight and not expect it to grow again and take root and metastasize in the way that we're seeing it now. And if we pay any attention to history, as you said, that cycle is constant. The cycle itself is constant. So when we had Reconstruction, that was followed by redemption, right? And that was the effort for white people who assumed a certain supremacy in this country to redeem the entitlement that they thought they were owed. And after the Civil Rights Movement, we saw a backlash. And we're seeing now a backlash to 2020. And people think that 2020 was the racial reckoning that never went anywhere. It actually did go somewhere. And it still has a palpable impact on young people today who are seeing a very different world that they want to inherit than the one we exist in right now. And I would posit that the reaction to 2020 is a reflection to how much power it holds. It is proportionate to the fear that people have for what 2020 could do and what it still can do. So I think that cycle is there. And the other thing that I thought you were going to mention, and I'm glad you talked about Robert E. Lee, but if we think about the issue of police violence, the Selma March came on the heels of the killing of Jimmy Lee Jackson, right? There was already the voting rights movement, but it was the police killing of a 26-year-old black man that spawned this march that took us over the bridge and took us into a new era of democracy. So these issues that were with us 58 years ago are still with us today.
Yeah, and they killed a young man who was defending his mother from being brutalized by a police officer because she was marching for voting rights in a majority black town in which only 2% of the African American community was registered to vote because they were not being allowed to register. It has everything. I told you the story has everything. It has everything. And it even has, Rashad, I want to bring you in because there is a media story, you know. Dr. King had rebuked a Time magazine journalist who had witnessed another brutalization of voting rights marchers. And he said to this journalist, why were you trying to help the people pull them off the ground and help the marchers? You should have been taking pictures. Nobody knows that happened because you were so busy trying to be helpful that you didn't photograph it. And so when the Selma March happened, the media, Time and other reporters, they understood the assignment. That the assignment wasn't to help the marchers pull them off the ground, it was to photograph it. And you know, I think about the fact that the video and the photographs of that brutality were played live and 50 million people watched it. My favorite anecdote about this is that ABC cut away from Judgment at Nuremberg. Little trivia thing for you, right? And Judgment at Nuremberg, of course, is about Nazi soldiers whose excuse for having killed and murdered millions of Jewish people in Germany was, I was following orders. And so these people are watching Judgment at Nuremberg with Germans, and then they see American fascists beating black people because they want to vote. And they got it. But it was the video, it was the actual media, participation that changed it. So I would love for you to reflect for a moment, where are we on the strategy of civil rights organizations like yours, civil rights organizations like LDF and others, to use the media in a strategic way, both social media and traditional, to advance the cause of justice?
Well, I absolutely believe that we are sort of in an ongoing way of continuing to develop strategies and develop the ability of both how do we reach people, how do we use the infrastructure of media, but how do we also recognize its limitations, right? The technology that has so much potential to move us into the future can drag us into the past. And we can't count on media alone without sort of infrastructure, without a Dr. King, without the infrastructure surrounding him. The media would have done exactly what institutions which are designed to make money will do. And so we can never mistake presence for power, right? Visibility, awareness, retweet, shout outs from the stage are important, but power is the ability to change the rules. And as much as we have to leverage media, we also have to hold it accountable. We have to do the work to shape the way it tells stories, because far too often, the stories that we hear are unfortunate rather than unjust. And what I mean by that is that we hear stories of inequality like it's almost a car accident. Like it's sort of just happening. When, even if we have visuals, folks will see those stories and believe that charitable solutions are enough and not structural change. So people will stop at sending water bottles to Flint instead of cleaning up the pipes and dealing with the tax policy issues. They'll stop at after-school programs rather than actually dealing with inequality with public education. They will say black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank instead of banks are less likely to give loans to black people, and that may sound like semantics, but if you say black people are less likely to get a loan from the bank, then people spend time saying, what's wrong with black people? Maybe we should give them financial literacy to deal with institutions which have targeted, exploited, redlined us from the very beginning. If we say banks are less likely to give loans to black people, then we actually begin to look at what is wrong with the banks and deal with structural change. And so how we tell stories, how we sort of focus our energy determines who we put the accountability on, because there's far too much work that comes out of the media that is about fixing black people rather than fixing the systems and the structures which put us in harm's way. And so that's the way I think is why the story of the combination between media and infrastructure, political organized infrastructure, the type of infrastructure that was built not just by King, but by so many of those around him, so many of the organizations and leaders that built movements that could channel the aspirations and the hopes and the dreams. And in sort of a 21st century context, it's not enough for us to be loud and present on social media platforms. It is our responsibility to build the type of power that changes written and unwritten rules.
Yeah, and let me correct it was Life magazine, not Time magazine, to make sure it was Life, not Time. Well done, but I want to bring in Secretary Castro, because the thing that caused the change was the fact that people who were not in the community, and part of the community, and in Selma, seeing Selma from inside, it was outsiders who were horrified and shocked because somehow they had managed to miss that in their own country, this is the fascism that was taking place. But that does go to show that you need alliances across communities. And so I wanted to just briefly talk about how do we build, there is a tension in the Black-Brown alliance that is stoked by people who don't care about either community, let's just be clear, but who would love to see our communities battle each other for a little bit of power, then collect together to have a lot of power. And so can you talk about that coalition building and how we can sort of build that as we're fighting, each of us, so many struggles?
It's a great question. You know, I have a mom who was involved in the Mexican-American civil rights movement. She's a Chicana activist. And so I grew up watching an activism that was very much building on the larger, broader civil rights movement that we celebrate this weekend in Selma. And so the first thing that I think about when I think of coalitions going forward is that I think there's a very strong foundation to build on. The other thing that encourages me a lot is I believe that in this youngest generation, that they work better together than ever and are finding new ways to coalesce, to bring their voices to bear on a whole variety of issues, from police brutality to climate change to abortion rights to any number of issues. Sometimes, you know, we inflict harm on ourselves. Janae and I talked about this yesterday at the LDF board retreat. What happened in Los Angeles with those Latino council members and the comments that they made, the racist comments that they made, I think set things back, not only in LA, but beyond that. But the number of people who are working together already and who want to work together, the number of people who share a more common experience also that is the foundation of working together is much, much greater. And so it gives me a lot of hope that moving forward, that coalition building will get stronger and stronger. I grew up and I represented as mayor San Antonio, which today is a city that is 74% people of color, about 64% Latino and 10% other people of color, Black, Asian American, Native American. And the only way that you've ever gotten non-white leadership at the mayoral level or beyond the county level is when there has been a strong coalition, especially a black and brown coalition. And that has happened with increasing frequency over the last 20 years. Proceed to how it can happen. Other cities like LA, when Tom Bradley was elected, or Antonio Villaraigosa was elected, or any number of other communities have shown us how you do this. And I think this new generation is taking it to even greater heights. That gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. And you know, the other thing that gives, I think, me hope is that there are still people who are willing to put themselves on the line to make these cases, right? These cases need plaintiffs. There's no case if there are no plaintiffs. And and Janae, you so brilliantly said, I mean, if you think about it, at the core of what was happening in Selma in 1965 was the fight to, not just to vote, but also to march, right? The right to actually march at all, which was the whole controversy. King comes back, they don't march, and then they have to go and get, you know, right? And sort of to just establish that this is a First Amendment right, just to march across that bridge. So but you need plaintiffs. So I want to talk to our plaintiffs here. I do want to start with you, Khadija. If you could just reflect on how does it work? Being a plaintiff in this situation to me seems like a huge responsibility. There are three of you all. The case is called the Milligan versus Merrill. We're going to talk to the Milligan and the Merrill. You're the Milligan. You're the Milligan. We're going to talk to the Milligan in a minute, but I want to speak to you. Can you just talk to us, those of us who've not been in this position? What is it like? What is required of you?
Wow. You know, they say with great responsibility comes, with great reward comes great responsibility. That's what it feels like. But in terms of like the case and what's it about, so we decided to sue the state of Alabama for their racist congressional map. So in Alabama, you have 7 congressional districts, and each one represents 14% of the population. And due to the census data that we were given in 2020, Alabama has a black population of 28%, so 14 plus 14 equals 2 congressional districts. However, Alabama did not give us those congressional districts. They decided to pack us off into one congressional district, which is the district that we're currently in, which is number 7. And so by doing that, they violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act says you cannot discriminate based upon race in any voting procedure. But that's exactly what they did by denying us of that congressional district. And when we are being denied of that congressional district, we are also being denied of black fair representation in our needs of the black community. It doesn't just put, you know, our livelihood on the line, it puts our health care on the line, our justice on the line, it puts our families on the line, but most of all, it puts our voting power on the line when we're denied a district, such as the congressional one that we're being denied here in Alabama.
And by the way, I could interview, I would do a whole interview with you for an hour. You all need to read her bio. When I tell you this sister is that, she's got so many things going on that are just fascinating. So I'm gonna have to book her at some point, just do it on the readout. So we'll take up this whole forum. But I want to talk to you because now you're an even more high profile member of this lawsuit because obviously your name is on it. And I wonder, this is not the Supreme Court that we had in the 1960s. Hard to believe that we actually had better, a Supreme Court that was actually, that gave you more hope in the 1950s and 60s than we have today. We now have a highly politicized court, but also a highly politicized country. And so, you are the most high profile sort of level of this case. Are you hopeful that you think it'll go through, or how do you come at it?
Sure, I'm definitely hopeful. I'm 6 generations removed from slavery, and so when you drive from here from Montgomery, if you drive to Selma from Montgomery on Highway 80, you pass a small town in Lowndes County called Lounsboro, and that's where my mother's side of the family is from. We used to have a larger tract of land, now that's dwindled down over the generations, to one small plot that is our family cemetery. And so there are, on that plot, people that I was raised with who would be in that 3rd generation. So my big mama and big daddy, my great aunts and uncles, I grew up in a household with them. And hearing the stories of what they endured and what they went through here in Alabama definitely left a mark on me. But it was also the activism of my parents. So my mother's from Montgomery. My father's actually from Texas, so the Texas connection here is really beautiful. From Congresswoman Lee's district, he grew up in 3rd Ward in Houston. And for him, when we moved to Alabama to be a caretaker family for our elders, that was a tricky transition for him to make. And it made me sensitive to caste systems within our country, but also within the Black community. He wasn't a college graduate when we moved here. So all of his connections that he had to do art and photography and cultural work in 3rd Ward and throughout Greater Houston didn't translate in Montgomery. And so I saw a person who had his head held up high in 3rd Ward come and internalized a sense of shame that he was managing a McDonald's or doing maintenance work for schools. And that just left a sensitivity in me about people who have a caste system imposed on us, because there were Black and white folks that were playing into that. And so when this case rolled around, as Khadija said, we were already doing redistricting work throughout 2021, but to have the opportunity to actually challenge what's essentially is a institutionalized caste system felt like one that would be really a life moment. But then to attach my father's name to it, because Milligan is certainly my name, but in Houston, Black men were calling each other by last name long after they were out of the military. So he was known as Milligan. So for me to attach his name to this case was significant, and he also passed away over the course of our organizing for redistricting. And so I wanted to, he wrote this poem called I Want to Be a Song for My People. And I felt like the hope of that could be something that would translate to his name being on the case. And that's certainly an agency that we still work to try to build and share with other people in the state as far as operating from a place of hope.
Yeah, that is a very hopeful story. But the thing that is so powerful about what you're saying is that this is your generational home, and this is the generational home. The South is the generational home of Black America, and of the majority of African Americans still live in the South. And yet you have states like Alabama, where you said 28% of the population is Black, but they're all packed in one district. Mississippi, which is 33 some odd % Black, one member of Congress. And the fact that it's so egregious and blatant that they're using these maps as a weapon against Black voters to deprive Black people of power. So I want to talk to my 2 additional attorneys here. And I'm going to start with you, Judith, because the arguments in the Supreme Court to me are they're sort of arguing against history. The idea that you can say that there's any way that you can pack almost a third of your population into a single congressional district, and that is legal at all, seems to me. I'm not a lawyer, but that doesn't seem logical. And yet you have a Supreme Court that has said that the election of President Obama means racism is over. Put aside 2020 being the end of racism, they thought 2008 was the end of racism. And so they're arguing from the point of view of saying you got one out of 46 presidents, we're done here. We're done giving y'all stuff. And so I wonder for you, just as somebody who is in this space litigating, do you feel hopeful that we can win these battles when they are arguing from a place of illogic?
Well, that's a hard question, and I mean, I want to back up because at the Supreme Court, I want to thank Janae for inviting me. I'm a proud LDF alum also, and met her in 2000, and that's what I want to back up to. Because it doesn't start.
That's right.
Even 2008. In 2000, the Supreme Court said that there is no right to vote. Mm-hmm. They were clear in Bush v. Gore, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is the legacy that we are building upon, right? And we have to put this in the context of what is happening, right? This is, for some of us, really the last stand of white supremacy. Because they see the demographics shifting. They know what's coming. They know that the power is going to shift hands. And so what do? You do what, my daughter plays basketball, you do what is called a triple threat. The triple threat is, number one, we're gonna gerrymander so we can hold power for forever. Number two, what we're gonna do is then we're gonna change the laws to pass voter suppression laws. Number three is, after we do all of that, we're gonna make sure that we weaken the protections in all of the courts so that those of us who litigate have no tools. Right? Have no tools, but you know what? The tool that we have is sitting right here. Yes. The tool for those of us who litigate at Advancing Project, we don't look just to the courts because we know when you go to court, you give it up power. You're giving power to people that are mostly white men sitting with black robes on and some white women who've never litigated a case before, but they're on the Supreme Court, right? And we're giving them the power.
I know I'm not in church, but well.
And so the power, right? Really has to be with the people, which is what happened in Selma to begin with, right? And so while we're fighting in the courts, while we're pushing for Congress to do what it can and to pass the laws that we need, the power is with the people. The power is with the people to create the stories, to build the power, to change the rules, to move the needle in the media, to tell the right story so we can push the courts in the right direction, right? And so that's where we've got to be. It's an inside-outside game.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, here, I told you this story has everything, because here, there's just all sorts of irony, Maya, because the very Voting Rights Act that came of the Bloody Sunday attack is the very act that is now being eviscerated by the Supreme Court and taken apart bit by bit, because they've decided that 58 years later, we no longer need protection, while they're also gerrymandering black folk into one district, you know, like 28% of the population, right? So it's kind of all happening at once. And then you go to 2000, some of the architects of the Bush v. Gore strategy, then fast forward, are the architects of the plan to do the fake electors to keep Donald Trump in office. Same people.
And claim it's constitutional.
And say it's constitutional. And wanted
They just made that up, by the way.
Correct. And wanted to use the Justice Department and the Supreme Court. It's like a full circle. And so I just, you know, for you, could you lay out how the battlefield looks on the legal side, on the side that just believes people just ought to have the right to vote? Because they are doing these in these concentric circles of illogic that keep the civil rights side wrapped up in litigation that feels like it's all going in the same direction as Roe. Whew. I'm sorry.
You know, when Joy asks you a question, she's actually said so much that you have to figure out what to say. Always the challenge on being on the rebound, and always brilliant. She already blew my mind on the plane, I've blown it again. And in many ways, I'm just going to repeat what all of my amazing colleagues have said, which is one, let's just start with this. If we didn't have power, they wouldn't be constantly trying to change the rules. If we didn't have power, they would not be constantly having to change the rules. So what we are seeing is exactly what we saw in Selma. And I just want one little historic anecdote because it matters, right? It's Selma, right after Bloody Sunday, roughly 600 folks walking, trying to get across the end of Pettus Bridge. Well, by the end of March, they had 30,000. 30,000 marching across the Evan Pettus Bridge. And on the way, there were some white kids, drove up in a car from Selma. I think actually they were in Lowndes County when they stopped them, but I could be wrong about that. But stopped, and some of the marchers were engaging them. And they started to say, well, you know, people are only marching because they get paid. In fact, there's a woman in the hospital just bled to death because she earned $15,000 sleeping with 41 black men. Okay, y'all, that was a lie. It was misinformation. They believed it. So even as marchers were marching, even as the numbers had gone from 600 to 30,000, the disinformation was spreading through the white community in an effort to say, all they have to do is register. All they have to do is register. They were shouting at protesters, just register. But I guess what I'm saying is, in order to keep control, you have to both lie and change the rules. And the reason that matters to your question, Joy, is every single thing we do to tell the truth, and for communities, for leaders, whether it's or in any community that we have seen across this country, and even today, Black Lives Matter, we've already got 32 states trying to make it hard to protest, saying that it's unconstitutional to protest. We saw that also around, right? The Courageous 8 were violating the law because it was more than 3 black people having a meeting with the Dallas County Voter League, right? So it's a repeat of what we've already seen, and it's a response to the power we've built. And I will say that what matters is when we cannot see our way over the bridge, when they're trying to bloody our bodies when we walk across, is when the lawyers matter the most. It's when the community leaders matter the most, and it's when the coalition matters the most. So, and I say that with the privilege of sitting in service at the Leadership Conference of Civil and Human Rights, a place I got to because we all came through but I say that because it's 230 national organizations. And yes, they're Latino. And yes, they're white women. And yes, they're all the traditional black leadership. And yes, they're Asian American. And guess what? They're people with disabilities. They're people who are elderly. They're people who are fighting for gun rights. And every single one of them is showing up for the Voting Rights Act. Every single one of them is saying, oh, I get it now. Instead of just telling me I can't have an abortion, they're also going to make sure it's harder for all the people going to show up and vote you out of office if you try to put your ban on my body. Oh, now I see why it matters that you're doing that to black people. And that's what we're seeing right now, and I just want to, and I want to say this because I don't know where the legal cases are going to go. I don't know. I know what Khadijah and Evan are going to keep doing. And I know what the rest of us are going to keep doing, supporting Khadijah and Evan. And I know what else we're going to do. We're going to be figuring out with Rashad how we build that power he's talking about, and we're going to be showing up on your show because you never stop. And this congresswoman right here, let me just say, she scares me half the time. And I'm on her side. And don't think if I'm not being aggressive enough, she doesn't call me and say, you didn't call me. And I'm not lying, I can show you the text, but this is the other thing I just want to say, because I also want to go back to Julian's. And Julian, I mean, this man is still doing it. Still doing it every day. But what Julian said is the truth. And I'm going to quote Hitler, so forgive me. But what Hitler said is, whoever owns the youth controls the future. That's what Hitler said. And then you know what they did? 1933, burned 25,000 books. Yeah. Well, gee, what are they doing today in Florida? What are they doing today in 32 states? We've got 1,600 titles of books like The Hate You Give, like Toni Morrison, like Roberto Clemente, banned. Mouse, which is a Holocaust book, banned. But it's all of our books. But our kids are all right. Because here's the other thing. I know it's confusing. I just got a face like that. I don't mean they're all right because we're not in trouble. I mean they're all right because what we saw in the midterms, they said, oh, can I curse?
Yeah.
I see a cross over there. I'm always looking for Jesus. Hallelujah.
I had to ask, after 2016, there were a lot of words started coming out of my mouth.
I'm always damn cool about it.
So, thank you. See, I had to go.
I'm gonna save souls.
So but they said, heck no. Because we saw the second highest voter turnout of the generation that with Gen Z and millennials, my kids, and with millennials, are becoming a third of the electorate. And let me tell you something about these numbers, and we've polled them and other people have polled them. They vote for civil rights. They vote for a government that gets engaged in equality. They will say, 62% will say the government should do more for black people. Not just equality, for black people, and we see it across race. They say that immigrants do more for this country than they take. They say that women should have a right to choose, that people should have a right to decide their own identities. They say it at a margin over 10 to 12 percentage points above my generation. And that's why they're trying to stop them, but they can't. Because every single thing they've done just builds that coalition, builds that resistance, and builds that demand. And that's why we saw what we saw in the midterms. And that's why if we focus, and this is a thing that we're working on as a coalition, on getting 4.5 million, just in the swing states, 4.5 million people who registered to vote in 2020 but didn't, or who have registered since 2020, we changed state houses. Just by getting them to vote. We don't tell them who to vote for. We change state houses and they know it. So they don't want them to learn, they don't want them to read, and they don't want them talking to one another.
Tell it.
Yeah. And they can't stop it.
Yeah.
Amen. Look, it's good to have somebody who can see, because I squint and I don't see. But I want to recognize Congresswoman Maxine Waters, who is right there. Now we have three Thank you, Rashad. He's an eagle eye. She's trying to be low key and in the second row. We're trying to slip in, right? But we spotted her. Well, now I want to go to the Congresswoman who is here with us. And by the way, just to what Maya said, that it is really important. I'm a polling geek, so even though polls are, lately. But in the last election, for the first time since the 1960s, white voters under 30, because even with Obama, white voters under 30 still voted majority Republican. White voters under 30 have always voted majority Republican. White voters are 60-40 Republican, no matter what the age. For the first time, 55% of white voters 30 and under voted Democratic in this last midterm.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you, when they say they don't like wokeness, they don't mean us being woke. They mean their kids. What they're afraid of is not black folks been saying woke since the 40s. They didn't care about the word woke. When they cared about it was when white kids started voting for Black Lives Matter. That's the woke. They don't like the empathy of their children and their grandchildren, because you know how they gonna vote? With blacks. And that's what they're afraid of. That's why they're afraid of woke. I want to get the Congresswoman in, because you want to talk about people who believe in Mission Impossible.
My husband and I executive produced a film called The Big Payback, which if you haven't seen, it's an excellent film. Erica Alexander, my sister Erica, directed it, co-directed it, and it's about the fight for reparations. And when I tell you this sister is the star of that, is the star of it, because you've been fighting for reparations and you took up that fight in Congress, and I commend you for that. But I want to talk to you about this legislative. You want to talk about Mission Impossible. The House of Representatives right now is a bit of an asylum. It should probably have a padded walls built in. It's challenging who's running it now. So is there any legitimate hope before Hakeem Jeffries takes over as Speaker, which will happen in 2 years? I mean, I'm just doing the math, right? I mean, they ain't gonna hold that House. But in the next 2 years, can we think that it's possible to get a John Lewis Voting Rights Act through?
Well, let me first of all thank LDF for staying the course, and all of those who have participated in this panel. I'm so glad your father came out of third ward. I will tell you his legacy lives on, and proud of the work and the fight you have. There are so many friends here that I need to call Janae congratulations, baby and Garrett, and I know, and this is my reparations brother, this is my criminal justice brother, this is my housing brother, and the rest of you are my sisters. We're grateful for you. Thank you to Terry Sue, who is fighting the good fight, and thank you to Auntie Max, who never gives up the fight. We are so grateful for Maxine Porter as a key and giant leader in our Congress. Thank you so very much. This is only a smidgen of the voting rights memos, articles, painful statements that have been made since 2013. I just have to give a brief chronological history, and that is the Shelby case. Isn't it shameful that we have not been able to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act since the Shelby case? Many of you may remember, this is history books, around 06 and 07, and it spread across America. They're getting rid of the Voting Rights Act. They're getting rid of the Voting Rights Act. That was when John Conyers, bunches of us as CDC members joined with our colleagues, tried to calm the waters, and we reauthorized it, bipartisan, and had a celebration, if you can believe, at the George Bush White House to sign the reauthorization. With the Shelby case and the ridiculous analysis of Justice Roberts, which is we have thousands of black elected officials, thousands of Latinos, it's Mecca, it's a day in the sun. You know, why do we need the Voting Rights Act, particularly Section 5? And of course, Justice Ginsburg said, well, that's like getting rid of an umbrella on a rainy day, or because we got rid of polio, should we stop having the polio vaccine? Some people say that about COVID. But it is an upside down thinking. So to answer your question directly, it will be a steep hill in this session, but we need the same 30,000 plus that crossed that bridge after Bloody Sunday. And that's what we have not had, to be able to wake up the powers to be. Let me be very frank. The Senate poses a very deep challenge, very deep challenge. Even when we had 50-50 and it was broken, the Harris, ably so, there were elements that wouldn't even get us to the 50-50. We're now at 51. It's because the people in Georgia voted. Yeah. In spite of it. Thank you, Georgia. So many of us are down in Georgia. Oh, there's somebody shouting. So many of us are down. It was a joy beyond the joy. We overcame that atrocious Neanderthal legislation, same kind in Texas. I think we have to think in a way that says that we have an inside game and an outside game. We have a court game and an activist game. We have an LDF game and a Lawyers Committee of the Civil Rights game, and the NAACP and others. And I think these are the years to show that kind of game. Because what is happening is, in the state legislatures across America, they are saying, we got this. In the Congress, we got this. Because we have just a margin of victory. If we're like 5 votes down, the Senate is where it is, but why can't the Senate bring up the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act and pass it? That has to be the question of the outside game. Because if we had one house to pass it, we passed it in the last session. Then we went, as they say, over the way. And over the way was, now we have one vote passed. That's a big majority, relatively speaking. That is a big majority. And I think we have to convey to the public, yes, we can. We shouldn't get them caught up in, oh, you're in the minority in the House. No, we work for you. The Voting Rights Act needs to pass, and you need to tell us to go pass it. We can get it out of the Judiciary Committee or on the Senate side, or should, and we can do a lot on the House side by, just encouraging them if we can't get it out, or we can shame. But the question is, don't let the law go even if there is difficulty, because once we have a law, let's get to the 118th Congress, 100, what are we in now? 119th Congress. Let's wait. No, we can't, because your point is very well taken. Let me just say this. Section 5 was a mecca, was like, oh my God. And by the way, the Voting Rights Act was like 5 pages long, and it was unbelievable. It was like, it was manna from heaven. I mean, we did so much with the 1965 Voting Rights Act, but Section 5, the Secretary knows that, we did so much. Section 2 is the rescue. Section 5 was, we could do anything, we could pre-clear, no, you can't do that, sit down, you can't redistrict that way, sit down, you cannot pass that Georgia bill, sit down, you can't pass the Texas, sit down. Oh, we love that. We had a good time. Lawyers had a good time. Section 2 is, it is the lifeboat. It is the rope in the water. We are drowning. Here comes Section 2. Yeah. Then Section 2 says, after they've left the house, you can get them back in with Section 2. Yes, that is discriminatory. Most Southerners, like me, are in redistricting lawsuits. We don't even have a district. We ran in a district that is temporary. We're in the courts. We're in the courts on Section 2. So they know that they can crush us. So I believe our message should be that the Voting Rights Act belongs to us. The John Robert Lewis Advancement Act belongs to us, the people. The 15th Amendment guarantees our right to vote. And let me just say this. I go beyond this, my heritage. And everybody knows I am, rightly so, H.R. 40, the Commission of Study and Develop, Slavery Develop Reparation Proposals. Thank you, my teammate, because I don't think there's any shame in that game. It is so well documented, but it all depends on elections as well. And the question of Section 5 and the 15th Amendment and Section 2, they don't belong to me as an African American. I say they belong to all Americans.
Yes. And
I'm pushing that agenda, and I need more people that don't look like me to be able to say that if they come for me at night, they'll come for you in the morning. You won't have to vote as well. Say to our elected representative, one, you need to represent. We know that in the community. Represent. I'm representing. You need to be able to represent. And that means you represent all of America. And if I don't have a vote in 3rd Ward, Houston, Texas, you won't have one in Little Rock, Arkansas. No, you have one in Utah. No, you have one in upstate New York or New England. And that's what is not being penetrated to those folk who would have the ability to change their mind. You ask the question, what will it harm you for there to be a legitimate Voting Rights Act? And I think, Joy, you've hit the nail on the head. People analyze about what they will lose, what will be taken away from them. And they really should analyze it from the perspective of how we will be better together, how the accountability will be better. Maybe we will not elect an individual who has been 10 different people in the last 6 weeks of the time they got elected. Maybe there will be accountability of that district if they had the ability to make sure, because New York's under a voting rights challenge as well. So we need to be able to say that your right is my right, your vote is my vote. And if one vote is gone, my vote is gone, your vote is gone. I believe that what we should do in the 118th Congress is that we should not let it rest. We should not let the crisis of voting rights rest. And we should challenge the House, the other body as we are supposed to call it. We cannot mention the Senate on the floor. That is an insult. So we cannot talk, we have to say, and Maxine, I'm sorry, Congresswoman Waters, we have slip-ups all the time. Our memory fades. We can't remember. Names get crossed. They braved a deadly pandemic to exercise their right to vote in an act of political self-defense against the most corrupt, incompetent, indifferent, and racist administration since the end of the Civil War. Most people know which one I'm talking about. But it was those voters in those states that saved us. They charged out in the midst of no water, long lines, cold, whatever it was, to do their job. I'm going to put the onus on us as representative government. And we need to be fighting in the halls of Congress for you to see us pushing the agenda of empowerment of all of our voters. We should not rest until we do that. If we can't get it done in the 118th, we'll certainly be poised to get it done with Speaker Jeffries and a Democratic United States Senate.
All right, amen. I want to go down the road here and give us some future leaning strategies so that we can be prepared for the fight ahead. So I do want to start with you, Janae, but we're going to start with you, but I'm going to have your section be called Scary is Caring. We do this on the show. We call it Scary is Caring. Because I like to know. I want to know what's coming. It's like when you're on a roller coaster. What I hate is going up, because you don't know what's coming. You know, when you hit that top, that's when it's really terrifying. But to me, the most terrifying part is going up, right? I want to know what's coming. So what should we have on our agenda for those who are taking notes and mental notes? What are the cases we need to be looking out for? What are the legal fights ahead of us that we need to be preparing ourselves